Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We're learning Mishna Pesachim, Perek Tes, Chapter 9, Mishnah Dala, Mishnah 4. HaPesach Shabbat B'Tumah, a carbon Pesach that was brought in a state of impurity. We learned previously that if the majority of the Jewish people became our Tameh on Erev Pesach, or for the Kohanim are Tameh on Erev Pesach, the carbon Pesach will be brought in a state of Tumah. Typically, of course, you cannot bring a carbon in a state of sacrifice in the state of Tumah. Anybody who's Tameh, we've learned until now, has to bring the Pesach Sheni, cannot bring the Pesach, carbon Pesach on Erev Pesach. However, as we've learned, that in a situation where the majority of the Jewish people are impure or the Kohanim are impure, then you can bring the carbon Pesach in a state of impurity. Even so, a Pesach Shabbat B'Tumah, a carbon Pesach that's coming in a state of impurity, it's being brought in a state of impurity. Other people, these other people who are Tameh, may not partake from it. Even though everybody else is Tameh, is partaking from it, that's because their Tumah is Tumas Mace, is corpse Tumah. That's when we say that if the Tumah that we're dealing with, the Tumah that's making everybody Tameh, is corpse Tumah, then we say the Carbon Pesach can be brought in a state of Tumah. That's derived from verses in the Torah. However, but even in that situation, people who are Tameh otherwise, from other things, not from corpse Tumah, but they're Tameh because of these other examples, they would not be, they're not permitted to eat from the Carbon Pesach. Now, the examples given are Zavin, Zavais, Nidais, V'yoldais. Zavin, we would translate as a man who has a flow or an emission. Zavais is a female, a woman who has her emission. We'll just call that for a second. Nidais is a woman who menstruates. Yoldais are women who give birth. So let's explain them. Let's start with Nidais. Nida is a woman who has her period. She menstruates. For the first 7 days after menstruating, she is impure. The night after the 7th day, she goes to the mikveh. The night after that, she can eat from a carbon. So here we're talking about a woman who has not yet gone through that process. She is still impure as a nida. The Mishna is saying that even though the carbon Pesach is being brought in a state of tumah, the only tumah that it can be brought in are for those who are tamei meis, impure from a dead body. But if you have a different source of tumah, that's not going to help you. Now, after a woman menstruates, there's a period, again, according to Torah law, there's an 11-day period that if she bleeds again and she has extra bleeding, that there she can fall into the state of a zava. That means a woman who has an extra flow. There again, depending on the situation, she has to wait and she has to go to the mikveh and wait for a certain amount of time to be able to partake of a carbon. And we're talking about when she is still in the process. Zav by a man is talking about where he has an emission from his male organ. It's not semen, it's something else that makes him impure. And there again, he has not yet gone through the process that purifies him and allows him to bring a carbon. Yoldais is a woman who gives birth. A woman who gives birth, if she gives birth to a boy, she is impure for the first 7 days. If she gives birth to a girl, she was impure for 14 days. After that period of those days, she can go to the mikveh. She becomes pure, but she cannot eat from a carbon until she brings her a set of sacrifices. Those sacrifices can only be brought for a boy after 41 days after giving birth, and for a woman after 81 days of giving birth. That's when she can bring her carbon, and then she can eat from a sacrifice. We're talking about that just before she's gone through that process. She is impure when it comes to eating sacrifices, and therefore we say that although the carbon Pesach is being brought in a state of impurity, that is a state of impurity where people are impure from a corpse tumah. But even in that, when that's happening, if you're impure from a different source, as of these, you would not be able to bring the carbon Pesach. Now, the im achlu, let's say they did partake from it. They ate from it. They weren't supposed to, but they ate, which means they were tamei and they ate from it. Typically, a person who's tamei and eats from a carbon is punishable with the punishment of kares. But in this case, the Mishna says, im achlu, but if they ate, peturi mi kares, they'll be exempt from kares. Here, too, we derive from a pasuk, from a verse, that in a situation where the only time we say somebody who's tamei who eats a carbon is liable to the punishment of kares, is only when it's a situation where the carbon we're dealing with is being eaten in a state of tahara. But if you're in a situation where the carbon that we're dealing with is being already eaten in a state of tumah, although you were in a state of tumah that you are not allowed to partake from it, nonetheless, the carbon punishment of kares would not apply. So again, they cannot eat from the carbon Pesach. They're not allowed to eat from the carbon Pesach. But if they did, which means they ate from the carbon Pesach in a state of tumah that they weren't allowed to, they still won't be punishable by kares, because a person will only be punishable by kares if he's tamei and eats from a sacrifice. If it's from a sacrifice that is being eaten in a state of purity. But if it's being eaten in a state of impurity, such as this carbon Pesach, this specific carbon Pesach is being eaten in a state of impurity because people who are at least corpse tamei are eating from it. Therefore, although they weren't allowed to eat from it, the punishment of kares will not apply. Rabbi Eliezer paiter af al bias mikdash. Rabbi Eliezer goes as far to exempt these people for entering the Beis HaMikdash, for entering the sanctuary. There's another prohibition that you're dealing with that is punishable by kares, and that is that if you walk into the Beis HaMikdash in a state of tumah, that's also a punishment of kares. Rabbi Eliezer derives from a pasuk that the only time we say that someone who enters the Beis HaMikdash in a state of tumah is punishable by kares is when is in a situation where everybody else is everybody else is entering in a state of purity. But in a situation where everybody else anyway is not entering in a state of purity, as in this case, the carbon Pesach is being brought in a state of impurity, then we say there is no punishment of kares for entering. So again, they're not allowed to enter, but Rebbe Lezer argues, again, he has a derivation from a pasuk to say that the prohibition of being in the Beis HaMikdash state of tumah, or at least the punishment of kares, is only when the situation is where everybody else who's entering is supposed to be tar, supposed to be pure. But in a situation where everybody else entering is allowed to be tamei, therefore even this person who may not be entering is not going to be punishable. They're not going to be punished with kares. But that's Rebbe Lezer's opinion. The Tanna Kama clearly does not agree with that. He does not agree with Rebbe Lezer's derivation from the verse regarding this. So he says, eating from the carbon Pesach for these people who are tamei and not allowed to partake, even though the carbon Pesach is being brought in a state of tumah, those people won't be punishable by kares for eating it, but they would be punishable by kares for entering the Beis HaMikdash in a state of tumah. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
What would happen if you